Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories of the hour. Ukraine says new talks with the United States and Russia begin in Abu Dhabi on Wednesday. President Zelensky says Kyiv is ready for substantive discussions to end the war. Meanwhile, a Russian strike hits a maternity hospital in Zaporozhye, Ukraine. At least 6 people are wounded, according to regional officials. Iran's supreme leader warns a US attack would trigger a regional war. The warning comes amid heavy US military deployments in the Gulf. Pakistan says its security forces killed 145 terrorists after coordinated attacks in Balochistan. Officials call it one of the deadliest security flare-ups in years. President Donald Trump says the United States could work a deal out with Cuba. The comments come days after he threatens tariffs on countries supplying Havana with oil. Israel says the Rafah crossing between Gaza and Egypt is reopened for limited passage. Only a restricted number of Gaza residents are allowed to cross. Nigeria's army says it kills a top Boko Haram commander and 10 other fighters. The military identifies the leader as Abu Khalid in Borno State. Slovakia's national security advisor resigns after US files show messages with Jeffrey Epstein. The move follows the release of millions of Epstein-related documents by US authorities. Shortly after warning of a regional war, Iran's supreme leader, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has claimed that Washington wants to occupy Iran. Khamenei said America wants to take over Tehran, pointing to the country's oil, gas, minerals and strategic location as key motives for US interest, according to local reports. Khamenei's remarks come amid heightened tensions with the United States, which has moved military assets to the region. He's repeatedly warned that any US military action could spark a wider conflict in the Middle East. Joining us now is Professor Ephraim Inbar, a senior researcher at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, joining us live from Jerusalem. Thank you very much for joining us here on the program. Of course, this situation, no one knows what is on Donald Trump's mind. However, what we do know is that US military presence in the Gulf is rising. Of course, Iran has the 3rd largest proven oil reserves in the world, along with extensive minerals and other natural resources. Are there any weight to the Ayatollah's claims here that the United States wants to occupy Iran merely for its resources?
I doubt very much that such accusations are true. There is a war weariness in the United States, and I think that President Trump will hesitate to send boots on the ground in Iran in order to conquer the country. Such an action probably also needs the approval of the Senate, according to the Act of War in the United States. And it seems so far from the modus operandi of President Trump that he likes to do things that are fast, get results quickly, like Maduro affair, like bombing a nuclear installation in Iran in June last year. So I think that the rumors about an impending invasion of Iran by the United States are not true.
Indeed. And of course, there has been concerns about this, of course, spiraling into a broader conflict We know, of course, Iran has proxies across the region, Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen. Israel, of course, as well has been said as a legitimate target for Iran should these US strikes take place on the soil in Iran. Is Israel ready for such a confrontation, and do you think Donald Trump would risk such an action given his efforts towards Middle Eastern stability already?
Well, I'm not sure he's interested so much in stability. I think he has certain goals in trying to negotiate a deal with Iran. He uses force in a coercive mode, threatening Iran. I'm not sure he really cares that much about his allies in the Middle East, maybe with the exception of Israel. So he will do what he thinks it's necessary to attain his goals, and the welfare of his allies are a secondary consideration. Although CENTCOM, the Central Command of the United States, is coordinating defenses with Israel and as well as other countries in the region in order to minimize the potential damage of an Iranian attack on those countries.
Yes, Ephraim Imbar, do stay with us as we move on to our next story. And the IDF Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, travelled to Washington over the weekend for high-level talks with US defence officials about Iran. The discussions come amid rising tensions in the region following US President Donald Trump's warning of potential military action against Iran over the regime's deadly crackdown on protesters. Israeli and American officials focused on regional security and coordination, though the exact details of the meetings have not been fully disclosed. Zamir's visit highlights the growing security dialogue between Israel and the United States as both countries keep a close eye on Tehran's activities and its impact on the wider Middle East. Joining us on this, as well as Professor Imbar, is Andrew Latham. He is an international affairs expert. He joins us live from Minneapolis. Thank you very much, Andrew, for joining us here. The IDF chief travelling to Washington for these high-level defence talks. This, of course, comes as the United States approves a $3.3 billion arms package to Israel, including the likes of Apache helicopters and others. Is Israel gearing up for another possible phase of conflict, mirroring that 12-day war we saw back in 2025 with these newly approved sales of US weapons towards Israel?
Well, yes, and I'm not sure that those weapons would actually make it into the region in time to have a material impact on this latest round of brinkmanship. But the meeting is connected to that. On the one hand, it signals solidarity. If this is about leverage, gaining leverage over Iran to get it, not to change the regime, I don't think that's in America's, that's on the agenda here, but certainly to change its conduct with respect to nuclear weapons and proxies and its regional influence. It's best to present a united front between the United States and Israel, and the United States and its Arab partners in the region, and perhaps between Israel and its Arab partners. And I would see this meeting in that light, signaling to Tehran. But also, it's about coordination. I think there's an ambient fear in Washington that Israel will jump the gun, as it were, and kind of fracture that united front in ways that forces America's hands in ways that it doesn't want. And so this is about coordination on the one hand between Jerusalem and Washington, and it's about signaling from Washington to Tehran.
Professor Imbar, back over to you. Do you think we're seeing the final phase of pressure before negotiations or before confrontation with Tehran and the United States and Israel?
Well, from what I know of President Trump, you never know what is the final state. He's very unpredictable, and it's very difficult to say if he will give the order to attack, or at what stage are the negotiations that he probably conducts with the Iranians. There is a lot of unknowns, so it's very difficult to say at what stage is the American military option.
Okay. Professor Imbar, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a pleasure to talk to you. Andrew, do stay with us as we move on to our next story. And we turn over to another story, and the US Navy destroyer recently docked at Israel's southern port of Eilat has been seen maneuvering into the Red Sea amid heightened tensions between the US and Iran. The arrival of the destroyer, reported as pre-planned, is a part of ongoing US-Israel military cooperation. This deployment follows a broader increase in US naval presence in the Middle East, with 6 destroyers, 1 aircraft carrier, and 3 littoral combat ships currently in the region. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump has stated that Iran is seriously talking to the US, while Tehran warned of potential regional conflict if attacked by the United States. We'll, of course, bring you all the updates ongoing in that situation between the United States and Iran as soon as we get them. We move on now, and Dmitry Medvedev, the deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, expressed that European powers failed to defeat Russia in Ukraine, but in their efforts they have inflicted significant economic harm on themselves. In a recent interview, Medvedev highlighted how Europe is undermining its own foundations, especially by attempting to strategically defeat Russia despite not achieving anything. He criticized European leaders for their actions, which he claimed were detrimental of Europe's economic well-being. Furthermore, Medvedev also pointed to public sentiment, citing Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban's statement that 75% of the EU population opposes Ukraine's rapid admission to the EU, but that EU leadership continues to pursue their political ambitions. Let's take a listen into the deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council.
А вот Европа меня удивила сильно, потому что Европа собственными действиями подрывает основы своего существования. Это просто поразительно. Европе может не нравиться российская политическая система, руководители России. Это их право. Но, значит, когда они для того, чтобы добиться каких-то личных, по сути, или узких политических целей, разрушают фундамент собственного экономического благополучия для того, чтобы наказать Россию, это поразительно. Ну, мы же знаем, что произошло и с энергетикой, и с поставкой целого ряда иных сырьевых и прочих товаров, сельхозтоваров с Европой. Цены растут, инфляция растет, проблем очень много. И все ради того, чтобы насолить России, а с другой стороны показать некую солидарность с Украиной. Ничего не добились, ситуация только ухудшается, поэтому, по идее, нужно бы прийти в себя, как некоторые страны, по сути, и сделали, которые изначально считали, что вредить себе, не России, а себе нет смысла. Но нет, этот курс продолжается. Вообще у меня такое ощущение, что власть в Европе захватила банда полоумных, которая стоит во главе Европейского Союза.
Andrew Latham joins us once again. Andrew, Medvedev says Europe failed to defeat Russia in Ukraine. Was that Europe's objective, or is he reframing the goal to claim victory?
Very much the latter, reframing the goal to claim victory. Look, the Europeans from the beginning did not envision a rerun of Napoleon invading Russia and taking Moscow. That was never in the cards. They had 2 objectives, one of which was to prevent the fall of Ukraine, and the other one was to make this so costly to the Russians in terms of blood and treasure that they would never do anything like this again, at least for the foreseeable future. If those were the goals, mission accomplished. Ukraine still is not intact, but still standing. And the costs in blood and treasure to Russia have been astronomical. It's not likely that 5 minutes after this war concludes, Russia will be in a position to launch another one against any of the European Union or European NATO members. It's just inconceivable. So not surprising that Medvedev will try to spin this in Russia's advantage, but it's a complete mischaracterization of Europe's goals and the actual way in which this war has unfolded and the cost that it's imposed. If anybody has lost this war, it's the Ukrainian people, first of all. And secondarily, it's Russia, because despite its grinding advances over the winter, it is not looking like it's going to take all of Ukraine. It is not going to be in a position to threaten the Europeans credibly with an invasion anytime soon. If any state has lost this war, it's Russia. It's not the Europeans.
Andrew, later on this month, we'll reach 4 years of this conflict. Who has actually paid the higher strategic price, Russia or Europe?
Well, it's a lose-lose. Russia has paid an enormous strategic price. Its status as a great power, as a player on the world stage, is greatly diminished. They weren't able to defeat Ukraine, let alone the United States or anybody else. I mean, that speaks volumes. In terms of their loss of diplomatic capital, it has been widespread. They had good relations with most of Europe and were selling lots of oil, for example, to Europe before this war broke out. They're still selling some, but not as much. The relationship is very bad. And although a lot of countries don't really pay too much attention to this war and still do business with Russia, its standing on the world stage is greatly diminished. Ukraine has suffered the brunt of this, rather. It is the one that has suffered the casualties and the destruction of its infrastructure, loss of territory. But the Europeans, have woken up to the fact that this is not the post-Cold War world in which peace and prosperity prevailed and were globalized. That world is over, and they've had to rearm, and that has strengthened their hand diplomatically and strategically on the world stage. And also, when I look at it then in the aggregate, this has enhanced ultimately Europe's geopolitical position in all sorts of ways. It has diminished Russia's, and all at the expense really of Ukrainian people.
And of course, Europe has bared the brunt somewhat in terms of economic struggles. It's faced high energy costs and slower growth. Does that mean sanctions have backfired when it comes to Europe?
Well, sanctions, I think, always have a cost both for the target and for the country or the political unit that's employing the sanctions. That's true of American sanctions. It's American consumers often that pay the price. It's true in Europe. In terms of energy costs, if the Europeans hadn't shut off most of their nuclear reactors before this war broke out, they wouldn't have been so susceptible to Russian pressure around oil. So that was a self-inflicted wound, as it were, before this war began. So yeah, at the end of the day, as I said, I think, the sanctions have not worked in that they haven't ended the war. They have partly undermined Russia's ability to prosecute the war, and the cost has been felt not just in Russia, but around the world and in Europe in particular.
And of course, do you think Russia's economy has truly proven resilient, or is it being artificially sustained by war spending?
Both and. The war spending has made up for a lot of other shortfalls and deficiencies that became obvious once this war broke out. But Russia has been able, and it's unclear how long this will continue, but has been able to sustain its war effort through domestic production and the functioning of its domestic economy, plus its connection to other countries around the world, China, for example, in a roundabout way, India as well, and even the United States. So you put that picture together, both the domestic Russian economy and its connection to the broader global economy, which has been attenuated but not broken, and it has been able to sustain this war effort. Now, there are real issues coming up. There's going to be a manpower shortage. The Russians have suffered terrible casualties, and that's going to have an impact on their ability to staff factories and things like that. There's a need to adapt to the new technologies that are dominating the battlefield, drones and AI tools, etc. But Russia so far has been able to deliver the quality and the quantity necessary not to win this war outright, but certainly not to lose it on the battlefield, and if anything, to continue making incremental gains on the battlefield. So I would have to say at the end of the day, the Russian economy war economy has proven to be resilient and robust.
And Viktor Orban says that 75% of EU citizens oppose fast-tracking Ukraine into the 27-country bloc. Even if enlargement fatigue exists, does that translate into abandoning support for Ukraine entirely from the EU?
I don't think so. I think within Hungary, there's real divisions, and even within Germany, between East and West, for example, there's real divisions on the degree to which Europe ought to be supporting Ukraine. But it's not a 70+ percentage gap in favor of not supporting Ukraine. Where I think he's probably onto something is most Europeans are not interested in rapidly moving Ukraine into membership of either NATO or the European Union. But those are two quite distinct things. Continuing support for the war effort, I think most Europeans outside of Hungary and perhaps parts of Germany are very much in favor, even though there are real costs in terms of money being spent on Ukraine that could be spent on Europe. But there's also very little appetite, I think, until this war is decisively settled, for admitting Ukraine to any of those multilateral institutions, the European Union in particular, but NATO as well.
And do you think Europe here, of course, as we reach into that fourth year, is slowly recalibrating its Ukraine strategy or doubling down here?
I think it doesn't have a lot of options. I think keeping Ukraine successful in terms of being able to blunt the Russian offensives and keeping Ukraine as a sovereign state, even with its diminished territory. And I think everybody recognizes that the Donbass is not going to be returned to Ukraine, nor is Crimea. So everybody's adjusted to that. And then it's a matter of, okay, what else do the Russians want? And should we be resisting their calls for demilitarization of Ukraine, for example, or for the prohibiting security guarantees from either the Europeans or the Americans or NATO? That's still up in the air. So to the extent that there's any recalibration, it is, okay, conceding the territorial losses, what do we need to help Ukraine achieve beyond that, and how do we blunt the Russians in their efforts to get more than that? But that is, I think, recalibration rather than radical change is actually the correct way to frame that, simply recalibrating.
Andrew Latham, thank you very much for joining us. It's always a great pleasure to talk to you on these issues. We now turn over to Central America, and polling stations have opened in Costa Rica for the general election, with voters heading to the polls to decide the future of the centre-right government. Voting stations reportedly opened at 6 a.m. local time and will close at 6 p.m. local time. Laura Fernandez, President Rodrigo Chavez's protege, is leading in the polls with over 40% of support signalled. If she maintains the lead, she could avoid a runoff. Fernandez has pledged to continue Chavez's tough stance on security and his anti-establishment message. Her main competitors are Alvaro Ramos, a centrist economist, and Claudia Dubles, a former First Lady. Both candidates are polling in the single digits, however, but could possibly challenge Fernandez in a potential runoff if she does not reach the 40% mark. Moreover, Fernandez is also aiming for a supermajority in the 57-seat Legislative Assembly, pushing for 40 seats to secure the power needed for constitutional reforms. The government only holds 8 seats currently, with much of its agenda stalled due to political gridlock. The Nigerian army has announced the killing of a top Boko Haram commander, Abu Khalid, and 10 terrorists in a night operation in Borno State. Abu Khalid, identified as second in command of Boko Haram in Sambisa Forest, played a key role in coordinating operations. Fortunately, no casualties were reported among Nigerian troops. The army continues clearance operations in known Boko Haram and Islamic State West African province hideouts across northeastern Nigeria, including Sambisa Forest and the Mandara Mountains. This ongoing battle with Boko Haram and Islamic State in West Africa province has lasted over a decade, resulting in tens of thousands of deaths and displacing millions across the Lake Chad region. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.